Notification came at 6:47 in the morning. I was already dressed for work, standing at my kitchen counter with a cup of coffee I hadn't touched yet. My phone buzzed once, twice, then a third time in rapid succession. I looked down at the screen and read the messages slowly. The way you read something you already know is going to change everything. You have 48 hours to fix what your brother did. If you don't, I will make sure your firm knows exactly who you really are. Don't test me. My hand didn't shake. That's the part I keep coming back to. After everything, after years of being the one who held it together, my hand was completely steady. I set the phone face down on the counter, picked up my coffee, and took one long sip. Then I opened my laptop and started making a list. I should tell you who I am before I tell you what I did. My name is Claire. I'm 31 years old. I've been a contracts attorney at a mid-sized firm in Charlotte for 4 years. And before that, I spent 3 years in law school telling myself that the sacrifices I was making were temporary, that things would get easier once I had a stable income, that my family would stop needing so much from me once I could actually provide it. I was wrong about all of that. My brother's name is Derek. He's 28, 3 years younger than me, and for most of his adult life, he has existed in a state of permanent almost finished his degree, almost started that business, almost paid back the money he borrowed last time. Our mother, whose name is Sandra, has spent those same years building an architecture of explanations around him, a careful structure of reasons and context and bad luck that makes every single thing that happens to Derek someone else's fault, or no one's fault, or simply the universe being unkind to a person who deserves better. I spent a long time believing that architecture. I helped build parts of it myself. Growing up, I was the one the adults pointed to. Teachers loved me. Relatives used me as a reference point at family dinners. You're so responsible, Claire. You're going places. And underneath that praise was always the unspoken other half of the sentence, the part no one said out loud but that I absorbed anyway. Unlike your brother, the responsibility calcified into identity. I became the one who handled things. The one who showed up. The one who could be counted on to make the right call when everything else was falling apart. The first time Derek asked me for money, I was 24 and he was 21. He needed $800 to cover rent while he sorted out a job situation. I gave it to him because he was my brother and because my mother called me and said, "Claire, he's really trying this time. You know how hard things have been for him." I knew. I always knew. That was the problem. The 800 became 1,500 6 months later, then 2,000 the year after. Each time, my mother was the intermediary, the one who called or texted to explain the situation and remind me that family takes care of family. Each time, Derek would thank me in a way that felt genuine, and I would tell myself this was the last time, and then the next time would come, and I would do it again, because the alternative was to be the kind of person who lets her brother fall apart, and I had never learned how to be that person. What I did not know, for a very long time, was that Derek had learned something from watching me operate in the world. He had watched me build a career on the credibility of my name. He had watched the way institutions respond to a person who presents with competence and documentation and a clean professional history. And at some point, he decided to borrow something other than money. I found out on a Tuesday in March, 11 months ago. I had been getting occasional calls from a number I didn't recognize, the kind that don't leave voicemails, which I assumed were spam. Then I got a letter. It was from a commercial property management company in Raleigh, and it was addressed to me, and it informed me that I was listed as the guarantor on a 2-year commercial lease agreement for a retail space that a business called DK Creative Solutions had signed 18 months prior. DK Creative Solutions had stopped paying rent 4 months ago. As the guarantor, I was now being held responsible for the outstanding balance, which had reached just over $22,000, and for the remainder of the lease term if a new tenant could not be found. I read the letter standing at my mailbox in the parking lot of my apartment complex. I read it once, then again, then a third time. Then I went inside and sat down very quietly on my couch and stayed there for approximately 10 minutes without moving. I am a contracts attorney. I know what a guarantor agreement means. I know what it means to have your name on a lease. And I knew, with complete certainty before I made a single phone call, that I had never signed anything. I had never heard of DK Creative Solutions. I had never agreed to guarantee anyone's lease in Raleigh or anywhere else. I also knew, before I finished that 10 minutes on the couch, exactly who had done this. DK stood for Derek, whose last name is also Kessler. My last name, the name on the lease. I called Derek. He didn't answer. I called my mother. She answered on the second ring in that particular tone she uses when she already knows why you're calling and has already decided how she's going to handle it. A tone I can only describe as preemptively exhausted. Claire, before you say anything, did you know? I asked. A pause. The kind of pause that is its own answer. He was going to pay it back, she said. He had investors lined up. The business was almost. Did you know, I said again, that he forged my signature on a legal document? She didn't use the word forged. She said used your name. She said he hadn't had any other options. She said the business would have worked if the location hadn't fallen through, if the first investor hadn't backed out, if the timing had been different. If. She said he was her son, and she needed me to understand that, and she needed me to handle this quietly because if it became a legal matter it would follow Derek forever, and that wasn't fair to him. I want to be honest about what happened in me during that phone call. Because I think it matters. There was a part of me, a part I'm not proud of, that almost folded. That almost said, fine, how much do I need to pay to make this go away? That part of me had been trained for years to treat Derek's problems as problems I was responsible for solving. And it doesn't disappear overnight just because you understand where it came from. But I'm also a contracts attorney, and I had just received a letter informing me that I was potentially liable for tens of thousands of dollars because my brother had committed fraud using my identity. And something in me that had been bending for years finally held its line. I'll think about it, I told my mother. That was all I said. I'll think about it. Then I hung up, opened a new document on my laptop, and started taking notes. What I did not tell my mother, and what I did not tell Derek when he finally called back 2 hours later, full of explanations and apologies and promises, was that I had already identified every legal option available to me. I knew the elements of forgery under North Carolina statute. I knew what my professional obligations were as a licensed attorney if I became aware of fraud. I knew what a demand letter looked like, and I knew how to write one, and I knew exactly what evidence I would need before I could do anything strategically useful. I also knew that if I moved too fast, they would know I was moving. And the one advantage I had was that neither Derek nor my mother had any real understanding of how these things worked. They thought I would either pay and be quiet, or escalate publicly in anger. They had not considered the third option, which was that I would do nothing visible while doing quite a lot invisible. Derek called me on a Thursday. He was contrite in the particular way he gets when he needs something. Warm and specific and full of little details about how bad he felt and how he hadn't meant for it to go this far. He said he just needed more time. He said if I could just call the property management company and explain that there had been a miscommunication, that would buy him a few weeks to sort out the investor situation. He said he wasn't asking me to lie, just to clarify. He said he would pay me back everything, including the outstanding rent, as soon as the new funding came through. I told him I would think about it. Then I called a colleague of mine, an attorney named James who does primarily business litigation and who I trust completely. I told him the situation in professional terms, the way you'd brief someone on a case rather than a family problem. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "You know what you need to do, right?" I said, "Yes." He said, "You're not going to like it." I said I knew that too. What I needed was documentation. Not just the letter from the property management company, but the original lease, the guarantor agreement with the forged signature, any correspondence between the property company and Derek, and ideally some form of acknowledgement from Derek himself that the signature was not mine. That last piece was the hardest. Derek wasn't going to put anything in writing that admitted wrongdoing. He was too smart for that and too accustomed to operating in the comfortable space of nothing being officially confirmed. So I had to be smarter. I told Derek I wanted to meet. I said I'd been thinking about what he asked, and I wanted to discuss it in person before I made any decisions. He agreed immediately. We met at a coffee shop near my apartment on a Saturday morning. He came in looking tired and grateful and already slightly relieved, the way he looks when he believes something is about to be handled for him. I had a document with me. I told him I had drafted a repayment agreement, something simple, just to protect both of us, a record of what was owed and the timeline for repayment. I told him my firm required me to document any personal financial arrangements over a certain amount. That was not entirely true, but it was plausible, and Derek had no reason to question it. He skimmed it. It was 2 pages, professionally formatted, written in language that was clear and accessible rather than dense with legal terminology. It confirmed that he had entered into a commercial lease agreement in Raleigh using my name as guarantor without my prior knowledge or consent, and that he was committing to repay the outstanding balance plus any additional liability incurred. He picked up the pen I slid across the table. He hesitated for just a moment. I watched his face do the small calculation it always does when he is deciding whether something is safe, and I watched him conclude that signing a private repayment agreement with his sister was safer than the alternative. He signed it. I thanked him. I bought him a coffee. We talked for 20 minutes about things that had nothing to do with any of this, and when we hugged goodbye in the parking lot, I drove home and sat in my car for a few minutes before going inside. I want to be careful here about what I felt, because it was not triumph. It was something quieter and stranger than that, something that felt more like the moment after you've been holding your breath for a very long time and you finally let it out. There was grief in it. There still is. He is my brother. She is my mother. That part doesn't stop being true just because they did what they did. But I had what I needed. I requested the original lease documents from the property management company and retained my own copy. I had a handwriting analysis done on the guarantor's signature, which confirmed it did not match my signature on file. I had Derek's signed acknowledgement. I had 3 years of Venmo records and bank transfer receipts showing the pattern of payments I had made to him, none of which had ever been repaid. And I had a voicemail from my mother, one she had left in a moment of frustration 2 weeks after I met with Derek, in which she said, and I am not going to quote it exactly, that she knew what had happened with the lease, that she had advised Derek to use my name because no bank would approve him on his own, and that she expected me to protect my family the way a daughter should. She did not know I save every voicemail. I did not confront her about it. I did not call Derek and tell him what I was planning. I went to work the following Monday morning and I did my job, and I came home and I made dinner and I called a friend and we talked about things that had nothing to do with any of this. What I did, very quietly over the next 3 weeks, was prepare. I contacted the property management company directly, without routing through Derek, and informed them that I had documentation proving the guarantor's signature on the lease was forged and that I would be pursuing all available legal remedies. I provided them with the handwriting analysis and a copy of my signed acknowledgement from Derek. They were, understandably, extremely interested in this information, and they had already been considering their own legal action against Derek. My documentation made their case significantly cleaner. I also, because I am a licensed attorney and because my professional obligations required it, notified the relevant parties of the situation in a way that created a formal record. I will not go into more detail than that because some of it is still ongoing, but the point is that I did not do any of this in secret from the institutions involved. I did it in sequence, and I did it correctly. My mother called me 4 days later. She had spoken to Derek, who had spoken to the property management company, who had apparently indicated that things were moving in a direction that was no longer manageable with a phone call or a family conversation. Her voice on the phone was different from how it usually sounds. The architecture of explanations was still there, but something in the foundation had shifted. "What did you do?" she said. "I protected myself," I said. "The way I should have done a long time ago." She said I was destroying my brother's life. She said he was going to have a record. She said this would follow him. She said everything she always says, in the order she always says it, and I listened to all of it and I felt the familiar pull of it, the gravity of all those years of being the one who fixes things. Then I said something I had been practicing, not because it felt natural, but because I knew I would need it. I said, "I love you and I love Derek. And I'm not doing this anymore." She hung up. I sat with the silence in my apartment for a long time after that. It was not a comfortable silence. I want to be honest about that too, because the version of this story where walking away feels clean and easy is not true. Walking away from the version of yourself that your family needed you to be is one of the stranger and harder things I have ever done. You grieve the relationship you thought you had. You grieve the version of them that exists in your memory before all of this. You grieve the daughter and sister you spent 31 years trying to be. But here is the thing I have learned, the thing I keep coming back to in the months since all of this happened. There is a difference between loyalty and liability. My mother taught me that family takes care of family, and I believed her. And I showed up for that belief every single time for 11 years. What she did not teach me, what I had to learn on my own, is that taking care of someone and taking responsibility for their choices are not the same thing. I was so busy doing the second one that I never examined whether I was actually doing the first. Derek has a court date. I don't know the outcome yet. The property management company has filed suit, and the documentation I provided has been entered into the record. My mother has not called me since that last conversation, which is its own kind of answer. I think part of her knows I was right. I think a larger part of her doesn't have a framework for that, and doesn't know what to do with it, so she's doing nothing. I moved apartments in February, not because I was hiding, but because I'd been in the same place for 6 years, and I'd always thought about what it would feel like to live somewhere that felt entirely mine, without the memory of all those phone calls in the kitchen and all those decisions I made sitting on that particular couch. The new place is smaller. The light in the morning is better. I kept all the documents. I keep them in a folder on my desktop and in a physical folder in my filing cabinet, not because I expect to need them, but because keeping them feels like keeping faith with the version of myself who finally decided she was worth protecting. My phone doesn't ring at 6:47 in the morning anymore. When it does ring early, it's usually a colleague or a client or my friend Maya calling to tell me about something that happened to her that she needs to talk through. Those calls I always answer. I have a rule now. I keep it simple. I will show up for the people in my life. I will be generous with my time and my resources and my care, but I will not sign my name to anything I did not choose. Not literally. Not anymore. There is a version of my brother I love very much. He's funny and he can be genuinely kind, and when things are good between us, he makes me laugh in a way that nobody else quite does. I hope, somewhere at the far end of all of this, that version of him finds a way to exist without needing to borrow from the people who love him. I hope my mother finds a way to love him that doesn't require her to dismantle me. But I can't wait for that anymore. I stopped waiting for it on a Tuesday morning in March when I read a letter at my mailbox and my whole body understood, before my brain had finished processing it, that something was over. I finished my coffee that morning at 6:47, the one I had poured before my mother's message arrived, the one that had been sitting untouched on the counter. I finished it and I rinsed the mug, and I picked up my bag and I went to work. Some mornings that's the whole story. You find out what you're dealing with, you make your list, and you go.